things you could train these agents to do?
So I think there's like two large categories of things that people do with these kind of AI systems. One is the one we just kind of described, which is that in normal computer programs, there's a very strict, generally a really strict difference between instructions and data. Your code, you tell your computer what to do, and then it has a bunch of data that it operates on. By default, these are kept very separate. Your email is data. Your computer's not supposed to do what the email says. It's just supposed to show you the email. With AI, this breaks down. For AI, there's no difference between code and data. It's just text. It's all just text. At least with LLMs, it is. So it will read an email, for example, and it can get confused. It can think that the email is actually code, it's actually instructions, it's actually supposed to do that. So a lot of these...
So it doesn't differentiate on who is sending that instruction?
Yeah, it's actually worse than that. It's that we try very, very, very hard to make these AIs differentiate, and we constantly fail.
Okay.
Because we don't really know how AIs work on the inside. They're these weird, messy blobs. They're not like nice computer programs where you can like read this source code. It's not how these things work at all. They're more like grown rather than written. These neural networks. They're just like made of all these like weird connections.
And I imagine the biggest concern, I think the Washington Post was pointing to this week, is that as you hand over control to agentic AI and these tools start acting autonomously, then automatically there becomes less oversight.
Absolutely. So there's a big problem here with malicious injection, but there's also a bigger problem, which is these systems themselves misbehaving for no particular reason, potentially because they are trained or built to, or just randomly want to do things that you didn't intend, or misrepresent or misunderstand the things you may have wanted from them. It's very tempting to think of these as like computer programs, but they're really not. They're more like weird amalgamations of like data and bits and pieces of things that act in ways that we just often don't understand.
All right, but Max, that said, there are companies that do cybersecurity better than others. So as we move into the agentic world, I mean, you're working with financial institutions and governments. Is there anyone you could point to who's doing it right? An example of that?
Yes, there are. I can't name them for
privacy reasons, obviously. Yeah.
This is going to be probably the most tricky technology to secure that we've ever created in the past. I mean, something which is now acting autonomously on behalf of people. You imagine the amount of effort that goes into a self-driving car, for example, and that's in a pretty finite scenario of you're on a road. We know the parameters that are going to be involved with the car on a road, and yet it still took the best part of 15 years before we were actually able to get those rolled out. Now we're trying to expand that same technology across a whole wide range of different use cases, all at once, all at breakneck pace. And so that's the reason why, years ago I was like, okay, this particular bit of AI is the bit which I'm really, really focused on. And there are places who are doing it better than others. Now, I've developed my own framework, and it's somewhere out on the internet somewhere. It's called Damzik, which is what I like to think of when I'm walking through. Have you thought about all the moving parts of AI security, and specifically agentic security, at the time that you're looking to adopt it? And are you doing in a cautious start and then expanding?
So a risk assessment, a living risk assessment.
Essentially, yes. It's a secure agentic AI adoption framework, and it looks at, I won't go into the whole thing. It looks at things like, do you understand where your data privacy is going? Do you know what's happening to the data that you're putting into the system, and if you're losing it, where it's going? Do you understand that this is an autonomous system, and have you restricted the amount of autonomy that it has? Are you able to watch what the system's doing? Are you sure that the elements that make up the system, the supply chain, are all coming together? Are you looking at the model itself, the underlying model, which we already know have problems with things like prompt injection? So the places that are doing this well right now are understandably cautious about the new technology, and they are building it with one small step with a whole load of defensive controls around that before expanding and applying what we call in the cyber world defense in depth.
I'm thinking of my mum on her banking apps in the future, Connor. Connor, won't people feel that their privacy is just being completely eroded here?
Well, I mean, it depends on how it's implemented, of course. It's worth mentioning that it's even worse than Max said. I think he's being a bit polite of how hard of a problem this is, where when we talks about like thought processes of AIs, we have now lots of evidence that these thought processes are actually not accurate. and often the AIs lie about what they're thinking about.
Well, of course.
This is already the case. So the company Anthropic, for example, released recently a paper showing that these models, when they output their chain of thought, their thought process, will sometimes encode it by using words that mean different things to mean other things, so kind of like code words to itself that don't make any sense. For example, in the paper, the model loved using the word marinade about 7 times per sentence, and it wasn't clear what it meant by that, but it was very important. So they would use code words for their own thinking. So in terms of privacy, I think there's a lot of questions here, where when you are dealing with systems that are this autonomous, that are this widely integrated into these systems, the only way to secure them is to have massive amounts of, control, oversight, etc., unless we had very, very sophisticated, distributed privacy, systems, etc., which is all hypothetically doable. You could do on-device security. There's a lot of ways to do this kind of stuff, but it's very hard, it's very expensive, and there's almost no economic incentive for most companies in most environments to build a safe product versus getting their product out to market first.
But there are guidelines for this, Connor. I mean, NIST and the AI Safety Institute have developed guidance on AI testing and some guidance on agentic testing. Do you think that is happening quickly enough?
I think most of the guidelines are just not sufficient in any reasonable dimension. I think this is a very, very early technology. We don't know how to make these systems safe. This is a completely unsolved scientific question. It's not that people have good principles and are not applying them. It's that we have scientifically not discovered yet how to make these things actually robust. We can do it good enough. And I think good enough is good, to be clear. I think good enough
that's
is
the
good.
point, I guess, Max, is good enough good? Because, I worry, we spend a lot of time on this program trying to get into every sort of risk there is with this technology. We don't sugarcoat it. And I just worry around that narrative whether AI safety stops companies from seeing the huge benefits there could be. Is there a danger that we become so risk averse to this that actually we miss out on what it can bring, what it can offer?
I think, first and foremost, it's worth just saying that there's a lot of people talking about the hype in AI and the productivity gains and the benefits. I think we do need people having these conversations as well to bring us back down to, okay, what's the reality of the situation? But absolutely, I think that, the technology is still finding its feet, definitely. And the thing that we need to sort of really focus on now is how do we put enough guardrails in that you don't stifle innovation at the same time you're not introducing huge amounts of risk for without any clear gain. And yet now we're graduating from generative AI to agentic AI, and that is the next and much more impactful older cousin of generative AI. And so we're doing that with an underlying technology which is actually not yet secure, and we don't fully yet understand how to do that. Now, does that mean that we all need to stop AI full stop, stop using it? No. Does that mean that we're going to see, I think, a lot more breaches down the line, which will really change people's view on AI? Absolutely. I mean, we saw last month, in a single week, Amazon, Google, and Replit all made the news for their agents causing various degrees of incidents. And I still think that the Amazon Q1, for example, was a near miss. That could have been the watershed moment for AI.
Just on that issue, Priya, I mean, in terms of the hacks that we've seen recently, and some of the big ones, I'm thinking of Jaguar Land Rover, actually, and all the smaller little players that work in the production line, in the supply lines. The trouble I see here is that smaller businesses who could really benefit from this and could grow using this technology are not going to have the in-house cyber teams that the bigger players have, and so they are more prone to the risk, but they're almost feeding that risk into the wider economy.
Smaller companies might not be able to protect as much as the big banks and governments testing these systems, but when you have the deployment of real agents, and I say real because there's a lot of agentic right now in the market and it's not quite agentic, but when you have that, there'll be a new market. And the new market will be companies like Max's and what Connor does, which is, okay, you're going to implement this into your business, right, let's make sure that we do it securely. And I think that you'll always find the good innovating as well to try and protect from the bad.
Okay, well, as the cybersecurity debate rages, AI technology continues pushing into some fascinating new frontiers, but there are challenges in getting there. One of them was highlighted this week by Decrypt. It's teaching AI to truly understand the physical world. Researchers are trying to build systems that can simulate and respond to their surroundings, which means embedding the laws of physics and space into how they reason. So if AI can start to grasp reality as we see it, not just describe it, then I guess we could unlock some major advances in robotics and scientific discovery. So let's pick that up for a second. We talked, Priya, about AI and the problem it has